de privacidad y protección de datos en pagos transfronterizos. Y para sumar a la conversación, contamos con distinguidos expositores. Saludo, por supuesto, con mucho gusto a los panelistas del día de hoy. Querida Clarisse Girot, es un gran gusto saludarte. Un abrazo a la distancia. Matteo Piazza, Conan French, a Jennifer Fowler, quienes nos harán el honor de participar y Jennifer en particular moderar este panel. Es un privilegio tenerlos con nosotros, que nos transmitan sus conocimientos de estos diálogos. La relevancia de los pagos transfronterizos ha escalado a niveles sin precedentes, ya sea por comercio electrónico, remesas o transacciones corporativas. La necesidad de transferir fondos a través de las fronteras es una realidad cotidiana para millones de personas. Sin embargo, con esta modificación a la forma de hacer mercado, viene una responsabilidad crucial y, como todos sabemos y a todos nosotros nos interesa, justamente la protección de datos personales. Los datos personales son la moneda de oro en la era digital. Cuando realizamos un pago entre países, compartimos información sensible que va más allá del monto transferido. Hablamos de datos bancarios, identificaciones personales, direcciones y en ocasiones hasta información biométrica. Si esta información cae en manos equivocadas, puede ser usada para fraudes, robos de identidad y una gran importancia en crímenes cibernéticos. Es aquí donde nosotros, como autoridades de protección de datos personales, jugamos un papel fundamental. Nuestra misión es ser garantes del derecho a la protección de datos personales, asegurando que tanto entidades privadas como públicas manejen esta información bajo los más estrictos estándares de seguridad. En este sentido, la colaboración internacional es, por lo tanto, indispensable. Si bien la innovación tecnológica en los pagos transfronterizos presenta oportunidades para una mayor eficiencia y accesibilidad, también plantea desafíos significativos en la protección de datos, el cumplimiento regulatorio, la integración de sistemas, la privacidad y la seguridad. Abordar estos desafíos requiere un esfuerzo colaborativo entre gobiernos, instituciones financieras, empresas tecnológicas y organismos reguladores internacionales para asegurar el crecimiento seguro y equitativo de los sistemas de pago digital a nivel mundial. Por ello, es importante tener presente estos esquemas de pago transfronterizos. Debemos asegurarnos la adopción de mejores prácticas en materia de seguridad de estos datos. Por supuesto que agradezco mucho a cada uno de ustedes que se den el tiempo de estar en esta primera sesión de 2024 de diálogos de la Asamblea Global de la Privacidad. Te cedo el uso de la voz, Jennifer Fowler, quien nos hará favor de moderar la sesión del día de hoy. Te escuchamos, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Commissioner, and thank you so much to the GPA for organizing this session. It's a wonderful opportunity for all of us to come together and talk about the challenges and the opportunities that the Commissioner explained so well in her remarks. So thank you very much. We have three incredible panelists today, so I'd like to start by just briefly introducing them, and then they will offer some brief presentations, and we'll have some Q&A session, and anybody who's dialed in is welcome to put questions into the chat, and I will do my best to try to field those questions, and we can hopefully have a very robust discussion. So our first panelist is Matteo Piazza. He's currently the deputy head of the Currency Circulation Management Division of the Bank of Italia. And he's a member of the Eurosystem and EU working groups that deal with cash and payment instruments matters. He's joining this panel in his capacity as the chair of the Financial Stability Board working group that is developing recommendations on data frameworks and cross-border payments. We also have Clarisse Girot. Clarisse is the head of the OECD's Data Governance and Privacy Unit, which supports the work of the organization in the areas of data governance, data flows, and privacy. She has previously held positions in both the French Data Protection Authority and the Jersey Data Protection Authority. Conan French also joins us. He is the director of the Digital Finance Department at the Institute for International Finance. And his focus areas have included mobile payment platforms, cryptocurrencies, data tools, and new technology solutions for compliance. He has worked in financial innovation for many years in both the private sector and the public sector, including at the U.S. Department of the Treasury and the Department of State, along with USAID. So let me give a very warm welcome to all of our panelists. And I would turn first to Matteo, who I think can offer us a presentation now to kick off the session today. So Matteo, I'd turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jennifer, and good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, everyone. First of all, many thanks to INAI and GPA for hosting this dialogue and for giving me the opportunity to present to the community of the data protection authorities the G20 roadmap on cross-border payments. May I just check that you can see my presentation? Are you okay? Perfect. Thanks. So as I was saying, thank you for this opportunity to present the G20 roadmap and the work the FSB has been doing within the roadmap to enhance the interaction between cross-border payments and data frameworks. For the sake of time, obviously, I will give just an overview of what we are doing, but at the end of the presentation, we'll find the contacts of some of the people more involved in this work, including Jennifer and myself, and we really hope that this is the start of a dialogue between the financial authorities involved in this work and the data protection authorities going forward. So before starting to illustrate the G20 roadmap and why it put so much attention on cross-border data flow, let me just clarify, and I think this is important also looking at the list of participants today, that while this is a G20 initiative, its scope and targets are by no means restricted to G20 jurisdiction. Indeed, available evidence collected by the FSB for monitoring the progress toward the targets of the roadmap show that Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America and Caribbean, and Middle East and North Africa are the most expensive region today to send and to receive payments. So it's important that to make progress, also this jurisdiction in these areas are involved in this work. And indeed, the World Bank and the IMF set up a program of a targeted technical assistance on cross-border payments for interested non-G20 countries. So again, a really global view on this roadmap. So I was saying why the G20 has made enhancing cross-border payments a priority, because basically there is strong evidence that making cross-border payments faster, cheaper, more inclusive and more transparent would produce real and tangible benefits on growth, on financial inclusion, and on international trade and so on. Already the commissioner hinted at this, the pervasivity of the cross-border payments today. So I think this is a point that we can take for granted. And the roadmap that was launched in 2020 under the Saudi presidency of the G20 is the first attempt by the international community to address the challenges faced by cross-border payments, at the same time maintaining their safety and security, including with respect to data protection, as again the commissioner was mentioning before. To address all the challenges that hamper the attempt to make cross-border payments faster, cheaper, and so on, the FSB and the G20 identified several priority actions. Among these priority actions that you see listed in this slide, there is action 7 that is precisely about the interaction with data framework. And with the data frameworks, we are meaning not just data protection rules, but a whole range of rules that affect data that are related to payments. Obviously, today we will talk about data protection rules, but it's important to understand that it is much broader than this, and indeed the stock take of financial authorities and private sector participants made in 2022 across all 25 member jurisdictions captured almost 150 different measures related to national and regional data frameworks that were relevant to cross-border payments. And as you see, there is kind of heterogeneity in the type of measures that were considered relevant. There were measures related to ML CFT requirements, risk management objectives, data management requirements, data localization requirements, and data privacy requirements is the third row in this graph. And you may see there were more, basically in 25 member jurisdictions, there were almost in all jurisdictions, there was some kind of data privacy framework that was considered relevant for cross-border payments. That's the reason why we had this work stream, because the stock take basically found some friction generated by these data frameworks without any pretense of being very comprehensive, just an idea of what kind of friction were identified by both authorities and private sector. A first point was obviously about fragmentation among data framework requirements and implementation. So basically, participants to the cross-border payment were confronted with very different data requirements, with costs, difficulties, and obviously less speed for completing the transaction. Another difficulties that was pointed out in our outreaches with, again, authorities and private sector was the uncertainty about possible conflicts between different requirements. So in some cases, AML, CFT authorities were asking some data to fulfill, to be compliant with the anti-money laundering requirements. At the same time, in some cases and some jurisdictions, these requirements was seen as having a possible conflict with data protection rule in the same jurisdiction or in the receiving destination. And so again, some clarity on this was needed. Another one was, I was mentioning about data localization. So the fact that in some cases you have an impossibility to make full use of information, for example, to prevent fraud and other crimes, because you cannot centralize information, you cannot exploit all the information. And finally, there was mentioning of the fact that some of these rules may hamper innovation because you cannot use data in a certain way. What is the target when we were, collecting this information about possible frictions? Obviously not to remove these frameworks, but to explore whether some of this friction could be mitigated without compromising on the ultimate objectives of data frameworks. First of all, obviously, data protection. Coming to the specifics of what were the pain points of the interaction between data protection rules and cross-border payments, they were basically related again to the fragmentation. This was a main theme across the answer. So many industry participants noted that common principles, or at least some kind of interoperability or the adequacy arrangements, mechanism to approach these different approaches to address these different approaches to data privacy would be good. So this was a common theme in kind of fragmentation, and try to find mechanism to address this and to simplify as much as possible the approaches or harmonize or to make interoperable, then we will come to this to possible way forward. But this was the kind of message that we collected in our exercise. Another one, as I was mentioning, was this the need to provide clarity on interaction between data privacy requirements and data frameworks. And again, this was a point that was noted. I mentioned, I put here a quote from a report from the Bank of International Settlements that noted that data protection was an area where they found possible difficulties in reconcile different regulation. In this case, both are obviously worthy to be protected because both anti-money laundering and data protection are very important objectives. And so again, this was more a point to find ways to satisfy all these important objectives. Another point finally was again with the lack of clarity that in some cases was noted about the data that were requested or protected by data regulation, and so whether payment information was in scope of those frameworks or not. And in a way, you can say that this is a good news because it means that there are apparently some low-hanging fruits in this work, in the sense that maybe it's just a point of having a way to share information, to clarify some points, etc., if this is the difficulty that has been found by market participants. So this was more or less the situation we found at the end of the stocktake. Two main messages: one, that this is an important area where to act, and the second, that we need indeed to further explore friction and challenges to understand possible ways to improve on the situation, and to discuss with authorities and people that have specific expertise on this area, starting with authorities outside the financial domain as data protection authorities and the private sector. At the moment, so we are working on, upon the mandate of the G20, to develop a recommendation for public consultation for promoting alignment and interoperability across data frameworks applicable to cross-border payments, and again, data privacy, operational resilience, etc. And this is a quote of the request that we have been receiving by the G20, and so we are currently working on preparing this recommendation on this topic, and public consultation is scheduled for this year at the end of the second quarter, tentatively, or beginning of the third, and the publication of the recommendation is scheduled around the end of 2024. Here, it's key for us that we are able to achieve a greater engagement with key stakeholders. I'm mentioning here GPA and OECD that are in this panel because precisely we think that institutions that have a lot of experience on this topic are crucial to produce recommendations that are indeed useful for our work, so that they are at the same time realistic and able to produce some real progress rather than just some kind of generic recommendation that is not producing the effect that the private sector and the authorities are asking us. So we, as a working group of the FSB working on cross-border payments data and identifiers, obviously we try to promote this greater engagement, and this session of the GPA dialogue is the first attempt on this, and I will later on recap a few other opportunities for engagement that we plan to have, and we would like to have really your help and the help of data protection authorities in preparing this recommendation, and again guaranteeing that they are relevant and realistic at the same time. It's important to note that not only the authorities but also the private sector respondents to the stocktake made clear that they are fully aware and fully respectful of the overarching objectives of data frameworks. And they just suggested to explore opportunities for mitigating frictions where possible. And the point that they noted was precisely that it was even difficult to start a dialogue with data protection authorities, with financial authorities together, because there was a lack of a venue to start such exploration, and invited explicitly in our outreaches the FSB to try to play this convening role for starting this dialogue. And so as a part of this attempt to have this dialogue, we established the dialogue with the GPA to start exploring opportunities for a joint analysis. And as witnessing the importance that the FSB is attributing to this work, the chair of the FSB, the governor of the Dutch National Banks, has sent a letter to the INE as a GPA chair, noting that we would really welcome cooperation with the GPA, including the possibility of having some substantive input and advice from members of the GPA on the draft recommendation I was mentioning before. And we also started conversation recognizing the important role that the OECD is playing in this domain with the G7 and the OECD in the context of the Data Free Flow with Trust initiative that, as you all know, is now launching a sort of operational phase. Just two more slides just to outline what, in our view, could be the possible areas for cooperation. As I said, we have this preparation of the FSB recommendation, and we will like to have some kind of a conversation with you. We put here just a possibility to have a small advisory group, but obviously, I mean, this is really open. What is important for us is to have some kind of feedback on the work we are doing. We will think about setting up a venue for having follow-up work on these themes. They will be outlined in the recommendations, some possible way forward. That it will be important also to keep working on this recommendation. Otherwise, again, they will not be realistic if there is no one taking care of carrying forward the work. So a possibility would be to have a permanent forum to discuss this topic and to bring forward the agenda. Another possibility that is still absolutely, I mean, at an early stage, but we think it could be promising, would be the inclusion of cross-border payments as a case study in the context of some established or soon to be launched initiatives. And again, a reference was made to the Data Free Flow with Trust, if this will be acceptable to the community that we will be working on this. But we also launch this invitation to the working group of the GPA working on this issue. We had some preliminary contacts early this year with the group working on framework and standard at the GPA, and so we think there will be an opportunity for examining whether cross-border payments could be a good case study in the context of the cross-border data transfer mechanism. Another area for engagement and cooperation will be the participation of the GPA to the incoming FSB high-level payment summit that will be on the 7th of February. And another areas that the cooperation, obviously we have different mechanisms here, some more permanent and some more operational, some other like more an exchange of experience or knowledge, but we will also have a FSB CPDI conference on the interaction of data frameworks and cross-border payments, and that we hope will be able to bring together again in a more structured way for 1 day and a half, data protection authorities, financial authorities, international organization, and standard setting bodies. And this has been scheduled for early October 2024 in Rome, and we will provide more details on this in the next months. what are the envisaged benefits from cooperation with GPA and data protection authorities in our view? Obviously, to bring together relevant expertise from different domains and authorities and take advantage of the ongoing international efforts on this issue. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. There is a lot of expertise, even if it's a very difficult topic, as we know, but we think it's important. Also knowing where challenges is an important advantage, and so this will be important in the coming months. And I made here just a few examples of what are the existing work that could be leveraged on for our work. As I said, the Global Framework and Standard Working Group has done some work on cross-border transfer mechanism. We have established a joint task force with the private sector, the so-called LRS, Legal, Regulatory and Supervisory Issue Task Force. And we could add some political traction, at least in some jurisdiction. There is this operationalization of the data free flow with trust, and I think Clarisse will speak later on this. And also we are also exploring with the FATF, Financial Action Task Force, and the data protection authorities. We would like to explore, and FATF is for sure on board on this, the interaction of data protection rules and ML CFT requirements highlighted by the industry. So we think there are a lot of opportunities for keeping up, for making this agenda make some progress, and to respond to the request by the industry and by what the authorities thinks could be a real progress for the roadmap as a whole. And we would like to have a feedback on this, maybe other opportunities that we have not spot. This kind of feedback would be very useful in our view. And obviously, we will be very glad if you have any doubts on and you want clarification, or if you want to exchange information or further discuss the interaction between data frameworks and cross-border payments. And I put here some of our email addresses for further contacts in case you are interested. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matteo. That was a wonderful explanation of all the work that's happening. I would give the floor to Clarisse to offer some remarks, and also just to remind everyone who's listening in, if you have questions about any of the presentations or remarks, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat, and I'll do my best to get them answered. Clarisse?
Thank you, Jennifer, and hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be back at the GPA Dialogue. I've been here a couple of times, and it's always a great joy to interact with my previous, universe, I would say, as the data protection regulator of yore. And thank you very much to Matteo for mentioning the OECD several times, and actually for coming to us and discuss about these difficult issues that you're facing, that both communities are facing. And we do not have a magic wand at the OECD, but we're definitely willing to try and help help solve what issues can be solved these very difficult matters. Maybe as a few points. The first is that these issues actually intersect directly with a number of work streams that we are on our table right now at the OECD. So, the concept of legal fragmentation and legal uncertainty is one that we have been grappling with for a long time, way before I joined the OECD, by the way, and not only in the financial sector. It is a fact that, the growing number of data protection laws globally, which is a fundamentally good thing. Nobody should doubt that, right? And nobody says the opposite, but combined with the growing number of sectoral legislation and the hyper presence of technology in our lives has, as a result, an inevitable fragmentation. Is not a bad word, it's just a fact, a cumulative application of rules relating to data and data transfers, which make life extremely complicated. For those who must implement it, and for those who must enforce and those who must enforce them. So whether the communities of regulators or the community industry stakeholders. And at the end of the day, we have this French pastry in France called the millefeuille, like you have, 1,000 layers of crust, right? And if it's well done, it's really good. But if it's not well done, it's very hard to digest. I think this is the result of what we have at the moment. We have a very thick layer of rules, and that at the end of the day are not truly palatable and not really easy to implement. And what is truly dangerous is that it actually ends up undermining the very purpose that these rules may serve. And that includes the protection of individuals with regard to the processing of their personal data, which is really at the heart of the OECD privacy guidelines and all the data protection frameworks that we have been mentioning so far. We also have an important work stream on cross-border and cross-sectoral, or I have to confirm my speaking language. So I think I'm speaking in English. Sorry. Apologies to the interpreters. We also have work on cross-border cooperation, which is important in the area of enforcement, but more and more cross-border regulatory cooperation, right? So between the regulators on enforcement in particular, because we have an important OECD recommendation in that space. And actually in the context of reviewing that recommendation, the recommendation was actually made to revise the recommendation and to include one or another cross-domain cooperation and cross-sectoral cooperation, because the intersection of these rules is actually essential. And therefore, for data protection regulators, data protection authorities to work with financial authorities, but also with competition authorities and telecom authorities and so on and so forth, is truly an imperative and a fact of life. But I'm not telling anything new to the data protection authorities themselves. They know this really well. But I think it's important for the financial authorities who are present today to hear that this is not new, and data protection authorities on a day-to-day basis do cooperate with regulators in other in sectors and in other domain. So my personal history at CNIL, I didn't work in this particular field, but I do remember vividly some of my colleagues working on the financial sector, data protection in the financial sector. So that was a while back, granted, but still we had colleagues who were working on a day-to-day basis with people in the French central bank and with the financial industry generally, to try and implement, CFT, AML requirements, in an optimal manner. It's not always easy. At the end of the day, someone has to decide, and the rule may not always go in the direction that the DPA could want, but cooperation is possible. It just has to be organized. And I would note, maybe it's not directly relevant to you, but it's actually interesting to see that recently the Court of Justice of the EU, we were holding a conversation with our members recently, actually imposed the duty of sincere cooperation on competition authorities to work with the data protection authorities. And it was interesting to see that, this duty had to be imposed here. What is really interesting is that we see Matteo come and say, we want to cooperate. We acknowledge there are issues. We recognize that data protection is an imperative. It's important. We're not trying to stay away from that conversation. We just need to find a space where we can do that. And this brings me to data free flow with trust. This acronym DFFT that everybody has heard and is not always really sure what it means. We are trying to operationalize this concept of data free flow with trust through an institutional arrangement that has been anchored at the OECD, and we're actually trying to give life to it through the nomination of experts to an expert community that will basically help run a number of projects, including one potentially on cross-border payments and data protection. That's actually the plan, one of the plans and one of the reasons for hosting this conversation today, for us at least. What does it mean? Very concretely, it's doing what the OECD can do well, which is to provide a forum for cooperation where we can actually connect all those that have to be connected, noting that the Secretariat of FATF is actually anchored at the OECD as well. We have a lot of these organizations actually anchored at the OECD, so no promises here, but we'd be very happy to try and organize such a conversation. Also, because I'm very fortunate to have, we are collectively very fortunate to have someone on the DGP team who is very familiar with all financial issues. So, would be instrumental in this operation. Just a couple of comments to finish on this first round. There are other issues that we need to bring into the discussion, and that's the intersection of AI, data, and privacy. AI, is not, we talk about AI a lot. There is a lot of AI in the financial world, AML, CFT, obviously a lot of AI. Just like the FFT is not properly described, AI can mean pretty much everything, right? We probably need to have some, further thoughts as to what this means as we develop concepts like fairness and others, and transparency in the area of AI. There are lots of intersections there. I would say privacy-enhancing technologies are also key. We need to discuss how pets can be used. Maybe we haven't given enough thought about it in a collective manner. There are lots of experts here and there. It's a very technical, advanced conversation, but maybe we need to make it a bit more, I was about to say, democratic and accessible to the larger world of regulators. And maybe we're trying to do that at the OECD. We hope to do that. And then, very basic concepts like necessity, legality, proportionality, which are key privacy principles that will never go away. Maybe these are the ones we need to focus on also, and having a direct conversation between stakeholders will be very important, because if we only communicate through, in writing, through letters and opinions and papers, without having people in the room talking about the nitty-gritty, the nuts and bolts of how AML, for instance, CFT, works, and how data protection laws are effectively enforced, we might not get to the result we want fast enough. Anyway, that was it for me for a first round of questions, and I'm very happy to take questions afterwards.
Thank you, Clarisse. That was very informative. I'm going to give the floor now to Conan to offer some thoughts as well.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. And the Institute of International Finance, or IF, as some of you may know us, is not just delighted to be a part of the conversation today, but also that this meeting is happening. This is sort of the this is the realization of a policy recommendation that we've been making for quite some time, that better coordination between the different branches of government and different public and enforcement entities was absolutely essential. A quick word about the institute that I represent to give a little background on our perspective. So the IIF is a research and policy organization, a nonprofit organization with close to 400 financial service members in 76 different markets. These range from the large GSIB banks to local insurers, banks. We also have a number of central banks around the world who are engaged and participatory in our work. And we focus on global standards. And so lots of time engaging with the FSB and the other Basel entities. And I'm from our digital finance work, which we launched about 8 years ago to look just at these issues. And our board are the CEOs or chairmen of the 40 to 50 largest institutions in the world. And they've set out 4 priorities in this area. And what we're discussing today really brings together 2 of them. We have AI, machine learning, data availability and use as one. The second is cross-border payments, both because of the G20 initiative, but also just the role that they serve in the economy. And then financial infrastructure and the next generation of tokenization and ledger technology. So this conversation today is a good example of why we think it's so important as innovation and digital change are shifting roles and responsibilities in a much broader ecosystem of the economy that we have this conversation today. Trust is also at the center of financial services. And so that ensuring that as we go through a digital transformation of the economy, that citizens continue to have that trust, that their data and important information can remain private and secure is absolutely essential. And being able to ensure and deliver that trust on behalf of the economy that it serves is at the center of financial services mission. And so we, as I said, are delighted to talk about this area where we do see some tensions and trade-offs between the different priorities that we have in not just in industry, but also in the public sector. And some of those tensions between speed, cost, transparency, and then ensuring that security, that privacy, that trust while also enforcing sanctions and AML and KYC and a number of society's other priorities that they would like to see enforced, is a tension and a place that is really worthy of our continued focus to improve on many different fronts. I think Matteo did an excellent job that I couldn't add much more to, representing what has emerged in the stock take, and we really want to applaud the work that the FSB and others have been doing as part of the G20 roadmap initiative there. And so there's not much that I could add on that point. I would just highlight that we are in the middle of a generational shift in payments and payments technology, and it's sort of comparable. Some people believe, I wasn't there when the move from Telex to SWIFT happened in the 70s, but some who were have said that that's similar to the changes that we see in different roles, responsibilities, new entrants, new technologies, and changing rails. And as we look forward at how new technologies like tokenization, ledgers, and AI and automation may continue to drive that change, we think it will just accelerate. And as Clarisse had very well pointed out, it's very difficult to discuss any of, or really address any of one of these things in a standalone manner. You know, when you talk about responsible, good, and well-governed AI, it all falls back to data and data availability and use. And similarly, in payments, when you talk about a next generation of trust for the exchange of value in the economy, again, we're falling back to data and making sure that we have the controls and that trust and security maintained in the system, but while trying to address those issues of increasing fraud and increasing use of the system for, unfortunately, sometimes nefarious transactions. So the impact of data frameworks is very, very central, not just in the payments area that we're discussing today, but also in how AI and machine learning tools develop and the value that they can bring to the economy. But within payments, we see as I had said, the need to continue to ensure security of data throughout the payments lifecycle, but trying to balance that with a real, call to deliver meaningful progress in the cost, speed, and transparency with which payments move. One example that we hear frequently from the financial services and payments firms that are members of our institution is, for instance, stories when they identify in one branch, perhaps an account that is at the hub of fraudulent activity and is being used for negative purposes, and they're unable to share that information easily, not only with other firms in the market, but also with their other branches in other markets. And so, for instance, a London branch might be unaware that a Singapore branch is very familiar that a certain account is a fraudulent account. And moving forward, we think that this is significant with upgrading new tools. AI and machine learning is being used and employed by fraudsters and criminals very, very early. Unfortunately, they never have risk managers or review boards to get through in the adoption of new technologies. And we've seen a really significant and troubling uptick of the use of Gen AI and other publicly available tools in making fraud just much better targeted, being able to trick humans into authorized payments that they believe are going in one direction and are actually going in another. And the use of these tools underscores why being able to share data and information about accounts and account holders in close to real time or quickly is important. We're also moving to a payments ecosystem where things will just happen much faster. In many markets, and particularly in Asia, we already see the linking of instant payment systems. And that brings, wonderful improvements to some of the customer needs and desires. But when you then think about instant payment, you need instant compliance in order to continue to deliver that trust and those roles that the public sector has delegated to the financial services industry on KYC, AML, CTF, and increasingly environmental controls and sanctions, and we expect that that list will continue to grow. So financial services view ourselves as very much trusted partners with the public sector in this mission. And again, I just highlighted at the top that this shared focus on trust, I think, is a very strong basis to go forward. So we're delighted to see this meeting happening today. This is one of the top things that we would call for, which is a greater coordination across different regulators within national markets, and then, of course, across borders. And as data and data flows really support so much of what society hopes and believes the future of technology and finance will bring together for a much more efficient, effective support system for a growing global economy, getting these data policies, these data principles right is essential. And so the work that Clarisse has outlined at OECD and trying to operationalize data free flow with trust, we think would bring a lot of benefits here. And I know it's a bit of a mouthful, so DFFT, but the principles that had been laid out there first in the G20 conversation and then last year in the G7 discussion about operationalizing data free flow with trust, we think would yield a lot of benefits. And that focus on privacy enhancing technology is another place where we see really promising developments, but again, ensuring that everyone is kind of aware of how the technology works, how it might develop, the speed at which things change, and trying to make sure that we have the principles and data frameworks in place to support their development rather than hinder it, I think is increasingly important. One financial service firm estimated that they blocked $2.7 billion in fraud last year using their AI systems to keep up with AI fraud. But the ability to continue to block that type of fraudulent flow while enabling the economy and enabling business is becoming increasingly challenging, and making sure that we have frameworks that are well informed by broad pieces of the economy and well coordinated and connected is essential. So thank you very much for convening this meeting today and everybody's time and attention, and we're delighted to dive into these topics a bit more.
Thank you so much, Conan. That was great. I appreciated the example you gave about how the payment firms how they experience sort of their regulatory obligations and sort of how the data frameworks play into cross-border payments. That was really helpful. I thought I would give a question to Matteo first, which is that, I do think there is a perception among data protection authorities that authorities in the payment space and policymakers in the payment space would prefer to weaken data protections. And I wondered if you could speak to that perception.
Thank you, Jennifer. Well, I think it's very important to dispel this concern, and I think already Clarisse and Conan helped me to answer this question. I already made also some point to this effect in my slide. I think that the FSB, financial authorities, but also the private sector made very clear from the outset in every possible opportunity, but this obviously is not necessarily known to data protection authorities, that any mitigation of the friction we are seeking should not come at the expense of primary objectives such as data protection or anti-money laundering or the fraud prevention. It is clear that we need to find a way to have results without any intended consequences. So unintended consequences is the risk if we are moving in isolation. This is the reason where seeking insistently cooperation with data protection authorities and with other authorities, just to be sure that we are moving to mitigate these unnecessary friction, as we call them, in the right direction. The nice things, in my view, is that win-win solution may exist along several dimensions. I think the work on interoperability among privacy regime that the OECD is carrying forward, and an option that they are exploring in broader context, as Clarisse was saying, not necessarily in the payment system, but this is clearly promising also for cross-border payments, and I think this is a way this is a way where we could achieve some win-win solution where we are moving to a better, superior equilibrium. And the same is true for the privacy enhancing technologies that Conan was mentioning, and also Clarisse. An example is a project Aurora that has been carried by the Bank of International Settlement in one of his innovation hub. And there, precisely, the proof of concept showed that privacy enhancing technology could be used to enhance AML CFT efforts without compromising at all on data protection, simply generating synthetic data set, etc., that could help this effort. So there are several ways in which efforts could be made to improve on the situation as a win-win solution. So I'm confident, and no one really wants to weaken data protection in place. And I think that if we are able to continue on this dialogue, many other possible examples of solution from the other side could come up. So I think it's important also for this reason to have this dialogue, because we see one part of the equation, but maybe not the other side. Thank you.
Great, that's really helpful. And just to follow up for you, Matteo, and the work that you're leading in the FSB, the working group that you're chairing, you gave a very detailed sort of explanation of all of the different pieces of that work and where the focus areas are. You know, as someone who's been working in this area for quite a bit of time, I wondered, you know, what do you feel are the biggest opportunities? You know, how in terms of how this work is shaping up, what are you most excited about in the work that you're doing, and frankly, that's going to come to fruition over the course of the next year? So where do you see the biggest opportunities to have the biggest impact here in this work?
Well, I mean, again, probably the biggest opportunities has to be found in a dialogue, to be sure. But what we are trying to set up, I think the pillars of our work are, first, as I said, this idea of creating a dialogue, a venue for having this dialogue that maybe exist at the national level, but for sure is lacking in a cross-border dimension. So having this global conversation to address cross-border and global issues is very important. And so hopefully we will be able to achieve this space for a conversation to make it a little bit structured and permanent. A second pillar, again, and I already told this, was to leverage as much as possible on existing work, and so to avoid starting from scratch from this point of view, because we think there is no point at all in redoing stuff that it's already in a sense done by other players. Where there are opportunities, I think, but this is really my view, my 2 cents, as you would put it. Some opportunities, I think, will be at the crossroad of 2 existing work streams. One would be this work on interoperability, on privacy regimes, on cross-border data transfer mechanism, etc. And the other one, from our point of view, will be our work on the standardization of data elements, because I think this could help in defining the characteristic of data, would be a kind of reassurance also for data protection authorities that we are talking about a specific limited set of data with some characteristics. So I think when we have in place this work that we are carrying out within the roadmap, not just my group, about standardization of data elements, and on the other hand, we are working on this cross-border data flow, maybe at the convergence of these 2 work streams, there will be some good opportunities. And obviously also, as we said before, also the other panelists mentioned the technologies could help both in giving a sense of urgency about our work, but also in providing a possible solution about this.
So we have a question in the chat that I think you may have just answered, Matteo. I don't know if you could you could sense it, but from the IMF asking, you know, while Asia showed that bilateral arrangements of trust are possible with faster payment systems linkages, how do we envision that this trust will be further extended across regions. Faster payments by nature are nearly instant. AML, CFT, and sanction screening remains a challenge unless there's wider harmonization of data requirements for faster payments leakages. Any thoughts or work on this area planned? I think you answered that. I don't know if you have additional thoughts on that question.
Yeah, what I can say is that we are very conscious of the fact that the fast payment system are moving a little bit. I mean, the hurdles up, and Conan also refer to this. What we can say is that indeed we reached out to the groups of the roadmap. As I show in my slides, there are several actions planned. One about fast payment system, and we reached out to them, explaining precisely that we could help a little bit I mean, if they are interested in this data standardization for their own work, we are ready to help. How this will develop next year, it's still to be seen, and it depends on another group. So I cannot speak precisely what is the work planned on this. But for sure, we reached out to them because we think, as was mentioned in the chat, that there could be some positive contribution from data standardization also on that area of FSP. We are working also, for example, on the legal entity identifier, and we also explain to the people working on fast payment system that having this kind of identifier could help making faster and easier possibly the AML sanction screening, at least in the sense that you can avoid false positive and this kind of stuff that we know from the private sector is really creating costs and diminuting and lowering the speed, etc. So I think that there could be also some good synergies with this area that the IMF was mentioning.
Thank you. Clarisse, do you have something to add?
Yeah, if a speaker can actually raise her hand. Just a couple, I mean, I'm really not a specialist at all. Just a quick comment, before joining the OECD, I was actually based in Singapore for 7 years. And that's when I could see like this boom, in fintech and Singapore was really a hub, FPS linkages were pretty much everywhere. So, we could go to Thailand and use Pay Now. It was just absolutely fascinating. What I found really interesting working with experts on cross-border data flows across the region, it usually started from industry, right? Because there was not a critical mass of data protection regulators there. So MAS and others were actually, I don't know if MAS is on the call, but the Monetary Authority of Singapore and others actually were taking the lead. And I could hear a lot of lawyers say, basically, you can never achieve FPF without a strong data protection law in place and a regulator that is capable of, understanding exactly what's happening there with the financial authorities. It was a very, something that really stuck with me. On just a quick jump to go back on pets and technology. I think it's clear if you talk to, the big, credit card companies and others, they will tell you and that's consistent with our finding that technology will never solve all the issues. Sometimes, with some pets will work, others will not. Some will never go fast enough. Sometimes there's not a business case, but we're very keen to hear more about that. And we're actually looking at hosting a workshop in Singapore together with the Singapore authorities, primarily the Data Protection Commission of Singapore, but also probably MAS and others on the use of pets in the financial sector. And we would be very interested. We want to focus on concrete use cases. I think this kind of activity, this kind of meeting can actually support our conversation as well. Just mentioning it in case I would forget later.
Thank you. Conan, I wonder if I could ask you the next question, which is that just sort of building on sort of Matteo's comments just previously, and given that you have such a strong interaction with the private sector, and you describe some of the challenges they faced and some of the work that IIF has been doing on this issue over the years, from your point of view, if there's one you know, one change or one particular goal or development that policymakers should be pursuing that would have the biggest impact, what would that be in this space?
Well, I feel like a parent asked to choose a favorite child, so I'll say that there are a couple of things that are equally, you know, good and important. You know, one, this work on better coordination, and you know, if interoperability of regimes is not possible, certainly, you know, working towards harmonization, if that's more possible in nodes of different countries rather than at a global standard level first, and then we can, you know, keep working, maybe that's a path forward. But I think that conversations like this one yielding more consistent and connected work to you know, map and be aware of the impact of various frameworks across different government priorities and objectives, I think would be really important. To that question of creating data exchanges and messaging, I think is essential. We've seen some markets, you know, Singapore has popped up a few times here, but I'll mention them as well. Again, having created, you know, and worked for many years to try to create the appropriate and good data exchange framework for their markets and to link with other markets. We see an effort in Switzerland at this as well. And that would address, you know, to your question is what is the biggest pain point? And I think that for industry, it's, you know, one, that lack of feedback loop. So they have systems that identify lots of information, and then others can combine that information and have a view of, you know, where the really bad activity was and what was a false positive. And it's very difficult without that feedback loop or the right data sharing environment to achieve the effectiveness and efficiency that we'd all like to see. You know, there have been some critical reports that the AML and KYC efforts are reaching somewhere between 1% and 5% of what they're trying to stop. And that's not an outcome that anybody on any side of the conversation wants. And so I think those are top of my list, and the IF list would be better alignment and awareness of those systems, if not interoperability, and then looking at data exchanges and messaging. And then, of course, data free flow with trust was very close to sort of my wish list of many different things. And so continuing to focus on the good work of OECD and others to operationalize those principles, create better awareness, and create better coordination across whole of government approaches to these objectives, I think would be really powerful. And then, you know, the last child, I guess, would be those new technologies. And so things such as homomorphic encryption and others, we have, you know, puts and takes, even just within the construct of privacy. You know, there are benefits and some challenges as well. And so I think keeping those amazing minds who are creating the new technology, you know, well connected with policy conversations so they can better understand what society is looking for, and society can better understand, you know, the realm of possible or what might be possible in the future. So as Matteo had mentioned, I'll just underscore that work by the BIS and projects like Aurora and others going forward in the next year, we view as a really valuable forum for public-private cooperation and engagement to solve these issues.
Thank you. That's great. Clarisse, DFT, data free flow with trust, getting lots of airtime. It's very exciting. And I wondered if you talked about it a little bit. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about what you plan in the coming year. And from your perspective, where do you feel the OECD can best contribute to the FSB's work on cross-border payment?
I had no idea when I joined the OECD that I would be, you know, a DFT agent of sorts. You know, with this acronym has sort of landed on the table, you know, when I joined, and that was 18 months back. So it has taken some time to actually, first of all, land, you know, the whole conversation at the OECD, because it's truly a global one. So we're hosting the so-called institutional arrangement for partnership to operationalize the FFT, but that does not mean we own it. That means really it's a place, the demand really is that we make people come here and we support the running of projects where every single stakeholder that has, well, the stake by definition, a stakeholder, you know, should be present, right? And, well, is present, and that's really our role. I think where we're trying to really, for me, the key target is to play a role that no one else can play, because we have a lot of conversations around data, a lot of conversations around AI, a lot of conversations around digital and tech. So there's there are many forums out there, fora, if you will, out there, who are working on data flows, and there's maybe too many conversations, and sometimes, you know, you're not even sure if they're the right ones. So what we want to make sure of is that we host conversations that no one else can host, that we're not duplicating work. We actually, by working on these issues, we actually support the diversity of communities that, you know, sees nowhere else to go. And, you know, not that we're welcoming all the homeless policy people, you know, but really we're trying to bridge a gap here. That's really the philosophy of this IAP. DFFT is actually a concept that over time, you know, will materialize, but has a great number of components. Actually, it's the facilitation of the promotion of trust, really, which is lacking today, to be frank, among the different, you know, bits and pieces, you know, of communities that are involved here, whether industry, government, people, right, us individual citizens, and try, you know, through projects, one step at a time, one brick at a time, to build a wall of trust, you know, where we will feel that data can flow safely, at least within these walls. It's a bit of an image, but it's a bit of an ideal, but that's what we're aiming at. So being very project-based and talking to people and making sure that we bring the right people around the table, that is truly, truly key. And when we discussed, you know, this project with Matteo and his team, and then, you know, listening to you, you know, Conan and others, we thought, like, this ticks the box. Like, we need to run a project. There is an actual problem to solve. We need several communities at the table. We can provide, you know, this meeting space. Now, it has taken some time for the IAP to materialize, because, you know, it will not surprise you, but all these things take time. You know, creating the right conditions, negotiating the terms and the budget, and, you know, and who and when and how long, and the mandate and all that. It takes an awful lot of time. And another important point, and maybe I will finish on that, is to reassure also the different policymakers that are involved in our work that this is not about watering down protections that have been, you know, elaborated over the years. I mean, we've discussed this time and again. Matteo, again, you know, gave a pledge that, right? It's not about minimizing data protection standards, and definitely not. It's really about protecting, at the end of the day, people. Just like when we say data protection, we effectively protect people that are behind the data. We never forget that, right? It's really about protecting individuals. But this is what you do when, you know, AML, KYC, you don't protect just the money, you protect the people, right? And we have to work together in that spirit, and never forget that this is really the end goal, is to make a life, you know, better for everyone. It sounds a bit bombastic maybe, but that's the motto of the OECD: better policies for better lives. And I think that's really the spirit in which we want to work in this.
Thank you, Clarisse. I'd love to turn up for a few minutes to innovation, which you've all touched on, and mentioned a variety of different potential tools, privacy enhancing tools, AI, all kinds of different things that are affecting all areas of our lives, and certainly will be important in payments. But I wanted to ask in particular, you know, given that innovation is happening mostly in the private sector, you know, won't rule out there are a lot of governments that are innovative in this space as well, but how can policymakers really support and encourage innovation? This is something, Conan, I think you mentioned, that you want to do it safely, but you want to have a space that's supportive for kind of risk-taking and innovation. And so I wondered, you know, what are the best practices, or from your point of view, or what are the things that can be done to support this? This is something that we're grappling with, you know, at the FSB. And so I just wanted to give you all a chance to talk a little bit about that, that particular issue for policymakers. Conan, why don't you start?
Well, what we've seen at the IF is being very supportive of innovation while extending that security and trust we seek in the system has been a principles-based approach. And technology, it's very difficult to move at the speed of technology. And without a sort of principles-based framework where you're looking for same regulatory outcomes, rather than trying to guess exactly how a technology would work and be prescriptive about the design and work of that technology, laying out those principles and those guardrails for the system in advance, and then staying very close to on an ongoing basis. And unfortunately, in the last generation, you could sort of look at a new innovation, think it through, set out the framework and rules, and then you could look away because there would be a whole generation of a decade or even more while that technology was a dominant standard. And unfortunately that, or for better or worse, that tempo of change won't exist in the society going forward, or certainly in those societies that are harnessing a lot of the benefits, growth and efficiency and other things that innovation can bring. But to deliver that safety, security, soundness, consumer protection, all of those things that are so important, it's critical to lay out those principles and lay out those outcomes that society is looking for, and then to be better connected. I think that as we look at one new technology innovation after another, they are acting a little differently than technology did in the past. And in the past, you could look at a tool and its use within one sectoral regulatory ring fence and just sort of focus there. But with the platformization trends and the efficiencies that these large platforms bring, and just think about Gen AI. This is inherently driven by the scale of the platform, the availability of data, and that will determine the usefulness of the tool, how the tool develops, and prevent sort of distortions. So we think that principles-based approach and continued engagement and ongoing monitoring and evaluation and engagement, rather than being able to set very prescriptive chapter and verse, is probably important when you think about tokenization, ledger, AI, machine learning, certainly the new classes of Gen AI and large language models. And so that's an approach that we believe would serve society well.
I wonder if Clarisse or Matteo have thoughts on this, sort of what you might have seen work in other contexts, or what do you think is important for us, as policymakers to consider in terms of supporting innovation?
I would leave Matteo first.
Well, I guess simply a message. I mean, one problem that we have clear in the roadmap. So I'm not talking about the specifics of my working group, but one problem that's clear for the implementation of the roadmap is that some of the objectives cannot be achieved without a strong ownership of the project by the private sector. And one point that I think it's important, we know that it's important for the private sector, is have clarity about the rules of the engagement. So I think this in some way echoes what Conan already said. I think for the roadmap going forward, for this involvement of the private sector, is important that in all fields, including the ones we are talking today, data frameworks, etc., there is clarity about the rules and possibly some kind of interoperability, alignment, or how do you want to call, but some kind along the principles we manage. But this kind of clarity would be useful to have the involvement of the private sector, and down the road, also obviously also innovation would be favored in this way.
And just one quick addition to what Matteo had said, that's important because the private sector needs to invest in these new capabilities. And so without having a sense of how they'll engage and interact with the public sector across different sectors and different economies, across borders, it's difficult, or certain areas may lose out or miss out on investment and upgrades of systems, technology, and capabilities for better outcomes.
Great. Clarisse, do you have
Yeah, I would definitely, I mean, this takes us back to the conversation earlier about legal certainty and legal transparency, and their key, fundamental principles in every, democratic rule of law system, where you actually need to provide certainty, otherwise you can't move forward. And that's true for business, it's true for every actor in the society. At the moment, I don't think there's any ill will, just the contrary, but bad will. But it's very hard for countries to actually plan on these very complex issues while remaining aware of the developments in many other countries and across jurisdictions and across sectors and so on and so forth. And so that would militate, of course, that would advocate for a principles-based approach, of course. And at the same time, we see that in data protection, at least, and in AI, at least, that now, we're really in the age of regulation, and we're, texts like, we always mention GDPR, so hard to avoid it, but I mean, data protection laws globally tend to be fairly detailed and prescriptive. So the only way we can make this work, honestly, is through constant engagement and structured engagement between different actors in the public sector, and of course with industry, and creating the conditions of trust. I mean, it sounds again a bit generic and crashing into open doors, but really the conditions of trust for this conversation to happen. I think we're getting closer. I think this maybe I'm too optimistic, but I think conversations like definitely the FFT, but other types of conversations among policymakers make me feel more optimistic. Like just the data protection community, for instance, that I know well, has grown, has structured itself better. The Global Privacy Assembly exists. There are fora now that you can go to say, hey, we have a problem, we need to work together. I'm not saying it's ideal and everything, flows smoothly, but I think we're as technology evolves very fast, we have a duty to cooperate fast. We'll never be fast enough, but the landscape is not as contrasted maybe on the regulatory front as it used to be.
Conan, I think I see you.
I'll share one quick anecdote to underscore why this is probably a good time to revisit those frameworks governing data. China has had a quite set approach to data and requirements on data for a long time, but the need to rethink this and think about the trade-offs in data control and localization has driven the Cyberspace Administration of China, who oversees this, to enter into a new dialogue now to think about some of those tensions and trade-offs around data control. And so I think if you look around for a global signal that this is an important time to rethink some of what has been put in place over the last 10 years with these new developments in mind, and perhaps look at some of those tensions and trade-offs through a new lens, I think that's certainly an interesting signal.
Great. Well, I think we are almost at time. I think I may give Clarisse the last word here. I've asked this a version of this question to the other panelists, but I would ask you, in your work at the OECD, if you've sort of encountered a challenge or issue that you think is really the most important that the FSB should try to address. From your perspective, what would be the most important thing for FSB to try to address in its work on this issue?
My biggest challenge is that there's always more work and never enough people. But hopefully, thanks to the FFT, and that conversation developing, we will solve that. I would say, to be very, very frank, that we should try to avoid falling into a trap where we sort of antagonize one region against another, one jurisdiction against another. This is truly a global issue. At the end of the day, we're trying to protect the same people, and that's all of us. We're all impacted, and therefore let's not try to sort of rank our legislations like who is best, who's not best. At the end of the day, we're all in this together. We need to make this work. And at the OECD, we've become, fairly familiar with these conversations, and we see that when there's a genuine desire, which is shared on top of that industry to cooperate, it is definitely possible to do that. But we need to have the people in the room who know exactly what they're talking about. And so people like Matteo and Conan, I mean, you are instrumental to this conversation. And the more technicians we have in the room, coupled with policymakers who are, working, let's say, at the at a higher, level, like on digital policy making, we can definitely make a really good conversation move forward. So I've turned your question around. I've actually said, it could be an opportunity rather than a challenge. But I hope it's fine.
It's great. Thank you. Okay, well, I would thank you to all the panelists for your incredible insights today, and thank you to the GPA for bringing us all together. I think it was a great exchange, and for everyone who joined, your attention. And I think, my takeaway from this conversation is that I feel like there's a lot of optimism. So that's always good. We need more of it in the world, optimism and opportunity. So thanks again, and I wish everyone a nice evening and the rest of their day.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.